What would you do if your own daughter tried to bury your truth under a book contract? Thomas Markle says he's reached his limit. After years of being branded, muted, and turned into the villain behind Meghan Markle's climb to worldwide royalty, he's finally speaking out, and not softly. He's coming with heat, with names, with paperwork, because this time, it's personal. Before we go on, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. It began with a phone call. One, Thomas says, is burned into his memory forever. He was home, still recovering from a serious health scare, when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something urged him to answer anyway. What came next, he claims, sent a chill straight through him. Prince Harry, the same young man who once promised to protect his daughter, was now issuing something far more dangerous than silence. A warning about a new memoir, a book that Thomas believes would finish the job. A job that started the moment Meghan entered the royal spotlight, leaving behind her modest beginnings, her family, and according to Thomas, the truth itself. But this time, Thomas didn't stay quiet. Instead, he opened an old folder he'd kept hidden away in a locked drawer. Inside, photographs, financial records, letters, fragments of a story never meant to be told. Not because of embarrassment, but because of love. Until now, Thomas says Meghan has always been skilled at polishing her public image. But fixing a reputation is one thing, fixing money. That's a very different game. He alleges that her rise to fame wasn't only about reinvention, but about quietly erasing parts of her history, suspicious transactions, media manipulation, and even anonymous offshore accounts connected to foundations no one can track today. Yes, you heard that correctly. This isn't just an angry father speaking out. This is about money, narrative control, image laundering, and possibly something more, something financial, something that could even be criminal. And Thomas insists he has the proof. So why speak now? Why hold on to all this for years, only to release it at this moment, just as rumors swirl that Prince Harry is preparing a second memoir, one insiders describe as raw, ruthless, and final. Because, Thomas says, Meghan is afraid, and fear makes people reckless, desperate enough to try to silence the one man who still knows where the bodies are buried. Figuratively, of course, or maybe not. Look at the timing. Meghan's public image is shaky. Netflix is hesitant. Spotify has walked away. The British press is growing bolder. Even former allies are starting to disappear. So if this upcoming memoir is truly her last move, Thomas Markle says he's not going down quietly. The man who supported her from afar, yet was excluded from her wedding in reality, is ready to reveal a version of Meghan no one wants you to hear. How far would you go to protect your truth if the people threatening it wore crowns and smiled for cameras? Thomas never expected to hear Harry's voice again. Not after years of being cut off, not after being discarded from his daughter's life like yesterday's news. But the voice on the phone was unmistakable, calm, polite, almost unsettlingly controlled. That's what shocked him. Thomas, the voice said, we've heard a few things. We think it's time you stop talking. There was no shouting, no argument, just pressure, carefully measured. Then came the line that still makes his stomach drop. You're not safe in the next book. Think about that. Prince Harry, the once smiling son-in-law, who sent kind notes after the engagement, was now warning him about a global memoir, one where Thomas knew he'd again be cast as the villain. Only this time, there would be no soft edits, no mercy, no flattering shadows. Thomas had already seen what they could do. During the Oprah interview, he watched himself reduced to a headline. A failure. A traitor. But this was different. This was revenge in hardcover. And why now? Because Thomas had started asking questions, publicly about where the money from Meghan's abandoned charities went, about the real purpose behind her sudden flood of LLCs after leaving the royal family. And according to him, she didn't like that at all. She wants me erased, he said, so she can rewrite herself without the people who knew her before the palace. And honestly, if you had something to hide, wouldn't a glossy royal memoir be the perfect weapon? But it gets darker. Thomas claims Meghan didn't just use Harry as protection. She used him as a weapon. Whenever the truth got too close, Harry would step in. Just like now, warnings dressed up as concern, threats hidden behind polite language. And this time, Thomas wasn't willing to cooperate. So what did he do? He opened the drawer, the one he swore he would never unlock inside. Sat letters, financial records, screenshots, and stacks of documents. Pages that told a story Meghan prayed would never reach the light. But what that folder held wasn't only about family betrayal, it was about lies, legacy, and laundering. And it started with a single detail, a transaction, a name, a trail. Something Thomas says blew the whole thing wide open. What if the image the world fell in love with was bought, carefully polished using money no one can properly trace? That's the question Thomas Markle is now asking publicly, and according to him, the truth is far darker than anyone imagines. After that disturbing call from Harry, Thomas says he didn't just feel intimidated, he felt lit on fire. So he did the one thing Meghan never anticipated. He started digging, not for revenge, he insists, but out of desperation. Out of principle. Out of the need to tell a story the palace press teams and streaming contracts would never touch. What he claims to have uncovered begins with a wire transfer, a six-figure donation. Allegedly sent to a women's empowerment foundation Meghan promoted shortly after stepping away from royal life. On the surface, it was praised as groundbreaking. Behind closed doors, it collapsed within 6 months. No announcement, no closing statement, no accounting, just silence. But the money, Thomas says, didn't vanish. It traveled through shell companies, LLCs, and consulting firms registered under unfamiliar names. A cousin here, a former college friend there. Some addresses traced back to Meghan's old Toronto circle. Others pointed to offshore tax havens. Coincidence? Thomas doesn't buy it. He remembers a very different Meghan, an actress scraping by, cutting coupons, late on rent, calling him when her car wouldn't start. The woman he sees today, draped in Valentino and Cartier, lecturing about climate change. While boarding private jets, he says is standing on a carefully hidden financial framework. You don't jump from frozen dinners to private chefs overnight unless someone is moving money, Thomas claims. Then there are the photos. Charity galas that never happened. Public events that existed only in press releases. Announcements written before the supposed appearances even took place. Thomas alleges Meghan engineered phantom philanthropy. Projects designed to exist on paper, polish her image, and quietly bankroll the next reinvention. It's image laundering, he says, like money laundering, only cleaner, harder to track, and easier to sell. Because who questions a duchess saving the world? But here's the turn. Thomas says he tried to warn Harry once, shortly after the wedding. He wrote him a private letter, asked him to look deeper. It came back, unopened, stamped across the envelope, returned to sender. That was the last attempt, until now. Because this time, Thomas isn't just holding documents. He's holding a letter. One, he says, proves Meghan knew exactly where the money was going and who was helping move it, signed with her real name. And what that letter contains, he believes, changes everything. Could one signature be enough to crack the royal dam? Thomas Markle says yes, because he kept it. A letter Meghan never expected him to release. Written, he says, during one of the most chaotic moments of her post-royal reinvention. And it may finally reveal what he calls the machinery behind her global transformation. Here's what he claims happened. In 2020, while the world was locked down and headlines screamed, Megxit, Meghan was quietly working behind the scenes. Thomas says she wasn't just leaving the palace. She was constructing an empire and recruiting the people to build it. The letter, dated, signed, and allegedly verified by a third-party source, Thomas refuses to name, was addressed to a powerful Hollywood PR strategist, someone linked to crisis, management firms, political consultants, and international image agencies. In it, Meghan reportedly thanks the recipient for guiding her shift from royal duchess to global influencer. She references talking points, media suppression tactics, and one phrase Thomas says he still can't forget, Project Clear Veil must remain off record. Our connections are vulnerable if exposed. Clear Veil, two words that appear nowhere in her public charities, branding, or corporate paperwork. But Thomas insists it exists, and that it's real. Thomas says it was a covert operation meant to scrub more than headlines. It was designed to erase the past itself. Old interviews quietly vanished. Photographs disappeared. Names were removed. Financial trails were wiped, rerouted, or never officially recorded. Then he reveals a second page, handwritten notes, references to offshore foundations, shell corporations, and one line underlined at the bottom in thick ink, secure accounts before Netflix pitch. Now stop for a moment. If this letter is genuine, it's more than private planning. It's leverage, it's proof. Thomas believes Meghan wasn't simply finding her voice. He says she was methodically burying anyone who knew her before the title, before the palace, before the crown, and according to him, this is no longer just about public image. It's about power, it's about legacy, and it's about fear. Because if this letter ever becomes public, Thomas claims it could trigger legal scrutiny, revive long-dormant investigations, and force powerful supporters to cut ties overnight. But the most chilling detail, she didn't just sign the letter. She added a postscript. If this ever surfaces, discredit the source, leak something about him, make it go away. That source, Thomas Markle. And now, he says, he's done being erased, because what he plans to reveal next may not only fracture the Sussex brand, it could pull others down with it, names, dates, and one video Meghan never wanted anyone to see. So what happens when a father pushed into the shadows finally steps into the light? Not to beg for sympathy, but to expose a system built on silence. That's the question. Thomas Markle says he's now answered, out loud, from a threatening phone call that reopened old wounds, to claims of financial manipulation hiding beneath glamorous headlines, to a letter that reads less like gratitude and more like the blueprint of a manufactured identity. We are now staring straight into a storm that's been gathering for years. And at its center is family. It's easy to dismiss Thomas Markle. Many do. They paint him as a tabloid caricature, a man clinging to relevance. That's how Meghan's defenders describe him. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if he's telling the truth? What if he was never irrelevant? Just inconvenient? What if this was never about a bitter father, but about a woman who built her brand on escape, edited her past, and silenced everyone who knew her before the crown? Thomas says he didn't come forward out of revenge. He came forward because he was cornered, because Harry's alleged warning crossed a line, because the people who control narratives finally pushed their last pawn off the board, and that pawn decided to speak. So where does that leave us? With more questions than answers, what is Project Clear Veil? Why does it appear in none of the public records filed by Meghan's team? Who were the consultants allegedly moving money? Were royal funds involved, streaming deals, foreign accounts? And most importantly, who else knew? Because if Meghan wasn't acting alone, if powerful figures were helping behind the curtain, then this may be only the surface of something far bigger than a family dispute. And Thomas Markle says he isn't finished. He claims he still has one final recording, one last piece, the missing link between Meghan's sudden global transformation and the quiet forces that enabled it. But he won't release it. Not yet. I'm giving her one chance, he reportedly said, off camera. One chance to tell the truth, not to me, to the world. Whether that happens, no one knows, but this much is clear. The fairy tale is cracking. And behind the curtain, where cameras stop rolling and publicists lose control, a different version of Meghan may be waiting to emerge. So now we ask you, who do you believe? Was Thomas Markle silenced, or simply chasing attention? Is Meghan a victim of royal cruelty, or the architect of an empire built on revision? And if that final tape is released, will anyone still be standing? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story is far from finished. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what comes next could blow this entire saga wide open.